Friends, thank you for being here today. We are living through a moment in history that feels increasingly uncertain, a time when the bedrock of our economic security seems to be shifting beneath our feet. As we look at the headlines, the rising prices at the grocery store, and the volatility in the world, it is easy to feel a sense of unease. But to truly understand where we are going, we must first understand where we have been, and more importantly, where others have gone before us. What if I told you that the collapse of the greatest empire in modern history did not happen because of a lost war or foreign invasion, but because of a simple, mathematical inevitability that America is ignoring right now? And ask yourself this: if the financial foundation of your retirement was slowly dissolving, would you be able to recognize the signs before it was too late? To answer these questions, we have to take a journey back in time, not to bore you with dates and names, but to look into a mirror. The image we see in that mirror is the British Empire, and the reflection is frighteningly similar to the United States of today. Let's start by examining the illusion of invincibility that once blinded the British Empire. If you were a citizen of Great Britain in 1920, you would have felt like the master of the universe. In 1939, just before the chaos of the Second World War truly erupted, Britain ruled the largest empire in human history. It controlled a quarter of the world S-land and a quarter of the world S-population. The sun literally never set on the British Empire. More importantly, Britain was the financial capital of the world. The pound sterling was the world's reserve currency. International trade was conducted in pounds. If you were a country, you held your savings in pounds. It was as good as gold because, for a long time, it was backed by gold. The Royal Navy dominated every ocean, ensuring that commerce flowed freely and on British terms. Britain was the unquestioned superpower, an island nation of only 44 million people that somehow managed to output an economy second only to the rising United States. However, history books often tell a sanitized version of how this empire ended. They will tell you that Britain lost its empire because of a moral awakening, or because of independence movements in India and Africa, or simply because the era of colonialism naturally came to an end. While there is truth to those political shifts, they are not the real story. They are the symptoms, not the disease. The real story is much simpler and much colder. Britain lost its empire because it went bankrupt. Not morally bankrupt, but financially bankrupt. It is a story of how a nation can win a war militarily, but lose it economically. The cracks began in World War I. Between 1914 and 1918, the war cost Britain roughly £35 billion. To us today, accustomed to hearing about trillions, that might sound small. But relative to Britain's economy at the time, it was catastrophic. The war cost 14 times Britain's annual economic output. To pay for this, they raised taxes dramatically, but it wasn't enough, so they borrowed. They borrowed from their own citizens, and for the first time, they borrowed massive sums from the United States. By 1918, Britain's national debt had exploded by 11-fold, but the most fatal mistake was currency manipulation. In 1914, Britain left the gold standard, so it could print paper money to fund the war. Suddenly, the pound, which had been the rock of the global economy, was just paper. When they tried to go back to the gold standard in 1925 at the old pre-war rate, it was a disaster. The currency was overvalued, exports became too expensive, and the economy choked. Then came World War II, the final nail in the coffin. The war effort required total mobilization. At its peak, 55% of the British GDP was dedicated to military spending. They were burning through wealth, selling off assets and liquidating foreign investments just to survive. By 1945, Britain's national debt was 250% of its GDP. To put that in perspective, the US debt today is around 123% of GDP. Britain was in a league of its own. The transfer of power happened quietly at first. In 1944, at the Bretton Woods Conference, the United States dictated the terms of the New World Order. The US dollar, backed by gold at $35 an ounce, replaced the pound sterling. Britain, bankrupt and broken, had no choice but to agree. They had traded their empire for survival. But the true moment of reckoning, the moment the world realized the emperor had no clothes, came in 1956. This is known as the Suez Crisis. Egypt had nationalized the Suez Canal, a vital shipping artery. Britain, along with France and Israel, launched a military operation to take it back. Militarily, it was a success. They occupied the canal zone within days. But then, the United States stepped in. President Eisenhower was furious. He didn't send troops. He didn't fire a shot. He simply threatened to sell America's vast holdings of British pounds. This would have crashed the British currency instantly. He also blocked the IMF from giving Britain emergency loans. It was financial blackmail, pure and simple. The United States delivered an ultimatum: withdraw from Suez or face total financial ruin. Britain withdrew in humiliation. In that moment, the world understood a new reality. Military strength is meaningless if you cannot afford to sustain it. Financial power is the only real power. By the 1970s, Britain was known as the sick man of Europe. The country was crippled by stagflation, high inflation, and a stagnant economy. In 1976, the ultimate humiliation occurred. The nation that had once ruled the world had to go hat in hand to the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and beg for a bailout. The conditions were harsh: austerity, spending cuts, and high interest rates. The empire was liquidated not because of ideology, but because the checks bounced. Now, having seen the fate of the British Empire, let us turn that mirror toward the United States today. The parallels are not just striking, they are terrifying. We are currently sitting on a national debt of over $35 trillion. Like Britain in the 1940s, we have accumulated this through endless wars and massive government spending. But there is a critical difference. Britain's debt exploded to fight existential wars of survival. Much of our recent debt has been accumulated during times of relative peace, funded by printing money to pay for social programs and economic stimulus that we simply cannot afford. We are seeing the slow erosion of the US dollar's status as the world's reserve currency. It is not happening overnight, but it is happening. The dollar has lost over 86% of its purchasing power since 1971. That is the year we fully severed the link between the dollar and gold, much like Britain did in 1914. Since then, we have been running on faith and credit. But the world's faith is wavering. We see the rise of the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, trading in their own currencies. We see Saudi Arabia considering selling oil in currencies other than the dollar. This is the Suez moment in slow motion. Perhaps the most alarming statistic is this. Interest payments on our national debt now exceed our entire defense budget. Think about that for a moment. We are spending more just to service the interest on our credit card than we are on the military that guarantees our security. This is exactly the trap Britain fell into. When your debt service costs consume your budget, you lose your ability to project power, and you lose your ability to take care of your citizens. The warning from history is stark. Britain didn't choose to end its empire. It was forced to by financial reality. The terrifying question for America is, what do we liquidate? Britain had colonies to sell off and let go. We do not. We only have our standard of living to liquidate. And there is one other factor that makes our situation more dangerous than Britain's: speed. It took Britain about 30 years to go from the dominant global empire to an IMF bailout case. In today's hyper-connected, high-frequency digital financial world, things do not happen over decades. They happen over days and weeks. What took Britain 3 decades could take America half that time if the trajectory continues. I want to pause here and ask you a question, because this is the most critical part of the puzzle. Do you believe the United States can turn this ship around, or are we past the point of no return? I read all of your comments, so please take a moment to leave your thoughts below. Do you see these parallels in your own life? Let ES start a conversation about what the history books might say about us 50 years from now. This brings us to the cracks forming in our foundation, where we must distinguish between the real economy and the illusion of Wall Street. You might be looking at the stock market and thinking, but the Dow Jones is hitting record highs. My 401k looks okay. Surely things aren't that bad. This is the dangerous illusion of the K-shaped economy. The letter K has 2 arms, one going up and one going down. The arm going up represents the financial economy, the stock market, the asset prices, the things owned by the wealthy and the corporations. The arm going down represents the real economy, the wages, the purchasing power, and the daily reality of the working and middle class. We are seeing a bifurcation of reality. For the average American family, the statistics are grim. A recent analysis suggests that in major American cities, a family needs to earn between $100,000 and $140,000 just to cover basic needs: housing, childcare, food, and transportation, without falling into debt. That is not living in luxury. That is treading water. Look at the labor market. We are told that unemployment is low and jobs are being added. But if you look closer at the data, you see constant downward revisions. The government will announce, "We added 200,000 jobs," and the market cheers. But nowhere is the trap more evident than in housing. We are entering an era of what can only be described as real estate serfdom. You may have heard talk of 50-year mortgages. To a banker, this is sold as a solution to affordability. They say, look, if we stretch the loan over 50 years, your monthly payment goes down. But do the math. This is a trap. In a traditional 30-year mortgage, you build equity. By the time you retire, you own your home. It is your nest egg. In a 50-year mortgage, for the first 10 to 15 years, you are paying almost entirely interest. You are building zero equity. You are essentially a renter who pays for their own repairs. You are locked into a debt contract for the rest of your life. This destroys the primary vehicle of wealth creation for the middle class. If you cannot build equity in your home, and your wages are not keeping up with inflation, you are becoming poorer, even if the stock market says the economy is booming. Beyond the economy, we must address the technical failure at the highest levels, specifically why the Federal Reserve may be unable to save us this time. For decades, we have relied on the Federal Reserve to fix our economic problems. If the economy slows down, they cut interest rates. If the market crashes, they print money, quantitative easing. We have been conditioned to believe that the Fed is all-powerful, but recent actions suggest the Fed is making a catastrophic mistake, repeating the errors of the past. To understand this, we have to get a little technical, but I will keep it simple. The financial system runs on collateral. Just like you need a house to get a mortgage, banks need safe assets to lend money to each other overnight. The safest asset in the world has historically been the U.S. Treasury bill, T-bill. Recently, the Federal Reserve announced a program to buy up short-term Treasury bills. They refuse to call it quantitative easing, QE, because they know that term scares people regarding inflation. But make no mistake, when the Fed buys assets to inject cash into the system, it is money printing. However, there is a perverse consequence to this. By buying up all the T-bills, the Fed is removing the high-quality collateral from the system. Imagine a town where the bank wants to lend money, but the mayor has bought up every single house, leaving no collateral for anyone to borrow against. The lending stops. The risk rises. This is why we are seeing a strange phenomenon. The Fed is cutting rates, or trying to manage them, but interest rates in the real world are rising. Why? Because lenders perceive higher risk. They look at the U.S. economy, they look at the debt, they look at the labor market, and they say, I need a higher return to take this risk. The Fed is flying blind. They are reacting to data that is months old. They are looking at the rearview mirror while driving 100 miles per hour toward a cliff. They believe they can manage the economy like a machine, turning dials and pulling levers. But the economy is not a machine. It is a complex organism made of billions of human decisions. And right now, the human decision is shifting toward fear. So, where does this road ultimately lead if these trends continue? Many people fear a stock market crash like 1929, but the crash that is coming, and the one we have been warned about by economists who study currency history, is not a crash in the stock market. It is a crash in the dollar. We are entering a period of inflationary depression. This is a term that sounds contradictory. We are used to thinking that in a depression, prices fall because no one has money. But in a fiat currency system, a system where money is not backed by gold, you can have a weak economy and rising prices at the same time. This is what happened in the 1970s, but the setup today is far worse. In an inflationary depression, the economy stalls, unemployment rises, businesses close. But because the government is trying to print its way out of the debt, the value of the money in your pocket collapses. This means the price of bread, milk, gas, and electricity keeps going up, even as your neighbors lose their jobs. It creates a brutal squeeze on the standard of living. The canary in the coal mine is already singing. Look at the price of gold and silver. Recently, gold has been hitting all-time highs, crossing $2,600, $2,700 an ounce. Silver is climbing rapidly. Why? It is not because people suddenly love jewelry. It is because central banks around the world, China, Russia, India, even European nations, are buying gold at record paces. They are dumping U.S. treasuries, government debt, and replacing them with gold. They know what is coming. They know that the U.S. debt is mathematically unpayable in constant dollars. The only way the U.S. government can manage its $35 trillion debt is to pay it back with devalued dollars, inflation. Gold is the hedge against that devaluation. When you see gold skyrocketing, it is the market voting no confidence in the dollar. Before we discuss what you can do to protect yourself, we must understand the external trigger that will likely force this crisis to a head, the end of America's exorbitant privilege. This is a concept that is often discussed in high-level economic circles, but rarely explained to the general public. Yet, it is the secret engine that has powered the American lifestyle for the last 50 years. Since the dollar became the world's sole reserve currency, the United States has enjoyed a unique superpower. We have been able to export our inflation to the rest of the world. Think of it this way. When the U.S. government prints trillions of dollars to fund deficits in any other country, that would immediately cause hyperinflation at home. But because the world, until now, needed dollars to buy oil and conduct trade, those trillions of printed dollars didn't stay in Kansas or Ohio. They flowed overseas. We sent them pieces of green paper, and in exchange, they sent us Toyotas, electronics, cheap clothes, and oil. It was the greatest deal in economic history. We got the goods, they got the inflation. But the Suez moment we discussed earlier with Britain is reemerging today in a different form. The world is getting tired of this deal. The weaponization of the dollar through sanctions has sent a chilling message to nations around the globe. If you cross Washington, your money is no longer safe. As a result, we are witnessing a rapid de-dollarization. The BRICS alliance, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, is expanding. They are actively building a payment system to bypass the dollar. But the most critical blow to our exorbitant privilege is coming from the oil market. For 50 years, the petrodollar agreement meant that if you wanted to buy oil anywhere in the world, you had to buy US dollars first. This created a permanent artificial demand for our currency. That agreement is fracturing. Saudi Arabia is now open to selling oil in Chinese yuan. When oil is no longer priced exclusively in dollars, the world no longer needs to hoard trillions of dollars in their central banks. And here is the terrifying part for the American consumer. If the world stops hoarding dollars, where do those trillions of dollars go? They come home. Imagine a dam breaking. Decades of exported inflation could come rushing back to American shores. When those dollars return, they will chase real assets here: land, food, housing, and services. This is the mechanism that turns 3% inflation into 15% or 20% inflation. We wouldn't just be dealing with the inflation caused by our current government spending. We would be dealing with the return of 50 years of printed money that the world no longer wants. This external pressure is the checkmate. Just as the US forced Britain to its knees by selling pounds in 1956, the global market can force the US to its knees simply by refusing to hold dollars. We cannot legislate our way out of this. We cannot print our way out of a rejection of the printer itself. This is why the cost of living feels like it is spiraling out of control, because the global subsidy that kept American prices low for 2 generations is vanishing before our eyes. But this crisis is not just about financial numbers on a screen. It is about the fundamental structure of our society and your personal freedom. This brings us to a concept that is uncomfortable but necessary to discuss: the illusion of wealth versus real freedom. In the past few years, many of us have experienced a strange paradox. We looked at our investment portfolios or home values and saw them hit all-time highs. On paper, we felt richer than ever. Yet, at the same time, our quality of life felt diminished. We faced empty shelves at the grocery store, travel restrictions, and a general sense that our world was shrinking. This was a dress rehearsal for what happens in an inflationary depression. True wealth is not the number of dollars in your bank account. It is your access to goods and services. If you have $1 million, but you cannot buy lumber to fix your deck because of shortages, or you cannot buy meat because of rationing, are you actually wealthy? The danger we face is that as the dollar weakens, the government's response will likely be to tighten its grip on the economy, trading your freedom for a false sense of security. When inflation truly bites, history shows us that governments rarely blame themselves or their money printing. Instead, they blame greedy corporations, speculators, and shop owners. The political response is almost always the same: price controls. We are already hearing rumblings of this in political discourse, proposals to cap the price of food, rent, or energy to stop gouging. It sounds appealing on the surface. Who wouldn't want cheaper groceries? But as any economist will tell you, price controls do not lower prices. They create shortages. If a farmer cannot sell his corn for a profit because the government capped the price, he simply stops growing corn. The result is not affordable food. It is no food. This leads to the next phase of the trap: the digital solution. As the physical currency fails and the economy struggles, the solution proposed will likely be a central bank digital currency, or CBDC. This will be sold to us as a convenient, modern, and safe way to receive stimulus checks or universal basic income, UBI, to help us cope with the rising cost of living. But this free money comes with strings attached that would have been unimaginable to our parents. Unlike cash, a digital dollar is programmable. It gives the issuer total control over how, when, and where you spend your money. Imagine a world where your stimulus check expires, if not spent within 30 days to stimulate the economy. Or where you are blocked from buying certain goods because you have exceeded your carbon allowance or meat quota for the month. This is the H-shaped economy that some experts warn about, a bifurcation not just of wealth, but of liberty. On one side, you have a dependent class, surviving on government handouts that come with heavy restrictions on their behavior. On the other side, you have those who have positioned themselves outside the system, holding real assets, gold, and independent means of production. The tragedy of the British Empire's collapse was not just the loss of territory, it was the brain drain and the loss of optimism that followed in the 1970s. The best and brightest left for America because they wanted opportunity. If America follows this same path of restrictive controls and stagflation, where will the next generation go? The fight ahead is not just to preserve the purchasing power of your retirement account. It is to preserve the freedom to use that wealth as you see fit. Now, you might be wondering, what does all of this global shift mean for you personally? Friends, I do not share this to frighten you, but to prepare you. If you are over the age of 60, this economic shift poses a specific and direct threat to your way of life. The most vulnerable people in an inflationary depression are those on fixed incomes. If you rely on a pension, Social Security, or bond portfolio that pays a fixed interest rate, you are in the crosshairs. Let's say your pension pays you $3,000 a month. That sounds stable. But if inflation runs at 10% or 15%, real inflation, not the massaged government numbers, that $3,000 buys significantly less every single year. Within 5 years, your standard of living could be cut in half, even though your check amount hasn't changed. We may have to adjust our expectations of what the golden years look like. We might see a return to a lifestyle that is more modest, more resourceful. The days of easy, cheap consumption funded by a strong dollar may be ending. We might see Americans traveling less abroad because the exchange rate is no longer favorable. We might see families consolidating households to share costs. This is the liquidation phase Britain went through. For them, it meant the end of global dominance. For us, it may mean the end of excessive consumerism. However, there is hope for those who are prepared. History shows that during these currency crises, wealth is not destroyed. It is transferred. It transfers from those who hold paper, cash, bonds, annuities, to those who hold real assets. This is why you hear so much talk about gold and silver. They are not investments to get rich. They are insurance policies to stay rich. They preserve purchasing power. If the dollar collapses, an ounce of gold will still buy roughly the same amount of food or labor as it did 50 years ago, even if the price in dollars has added a few zeros. Furthermore, we must look at our debt. In a high-interest, high-inflation environment, variable rate debt is a killer. Credit cards and adjustable rate mortgages can destroy a retirement plan overnight. The priority must be to eliminate these liabilities. In closing, I want to leave you with a final warning. The history of the British Empire teaches us a lesson that is hard to swallow. Empires do not end because of moral progress. They end because they go broke. Britain didn't want to stop being a superpower. They were forced to stop because the math no longer worked. They hit a wall where the cost of their debts exceeded their ability to pay. The United States is currently speeding toward that same wall. We have $35 trillion in debt. We have a deficit that grows by trillions every year. We have a political class, on both sides of the aisle, that refuses to cut spending or address the entitlement crisis. They are kicking the can down the road, just as British politicians did in the 1920s and 30s. But the road is running out. The signals are all around us. The rising gold price is a siren. The not QE programs by the Fed are desperate attempts to patch the plumbing. The struggle of the young family to buy a home is the cracking of the social contract. We cannot control what the Federal Reserve does. We cannot control what Congress spends, but we can control our own households. We can look at our own balance sheets with the same scrutiny that history applies to empires. The warning from Britain is clear. Denial is not a strategy. The $35 trillion bill is coming due. Whether we pay it through austerity or through inflation, we will pay it. The only question is whether you will be holding the assets that survive the transition or the paper promises that burn away. If you found value in this video and want to help us spread this message, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps the algorithm show this to more people who need to wake up to this reality. Thank you for listening, and may we all find the wisdom to navigate the storm ahead.